Hey everyone, ready to dive into something a little bit creepy. We're talking about spotting medical misinformation, but not just any kind, the kind made by AI.
Those large language models?
Yeah, LLMs, they're going to use more and more in healthcare, right? Which is amazing, but
It's a double-edged sword, for sure.
yeah, because they can sometimes make up stuff that sounds totally believable, but it's actually...
Completely false.
Exactly! Hallucinations, researchers call them, not good when it comes to medicine.
Absolutely not. Accuracy is everything.
Couldn't agree more. And that's why this deep dive is going to be so interesting. We're looking at a research paper all about a new benchmark, MedHallu.
MedHallu.
Yeah, and it's like a test to see how well LLMs can spot this sneaky, made-up medical stuff.
You can think of it like a lie detector test for AI.
I like that, but before we get into how well the LLMs did, I'm kind of curious, how did they even make these tricky medical hallucinations in the first place? Sounds like a challenge.
Oh, it was. They used a bunch of different LLMs themselves to generate these potential hallucinations, so they fed them questions, right? The correct answers, some background knowledge, then said, okay, now come up with believable but wrong answers.
So they were like training LLMs to make misinformation so they could train other LLMs to detect it? Talk about fighting fire with fire.
You got it. But of course, there's that risk of like creating even more sneaky deception stuff,
Yeah,
right?
that's what I was thinking. How'd they keep things, under control?
Good question. So they had multiple LLMs acting as judges.
Judges.
Yeah. Determining if they were fooled by the generated answers. And only the answers that fooled, most of the judges made it into the data set.
Ah, okay, so it's like a multi-level quality control for misinformation. Got to make sure it's good misinformation.
Exactly. And they also wanted to make sure those hallucinations weren't too obviously different from the real answers. So they used this technique called bidirectional entailment.
Okay, now you're using the big words. What is that in English?
Fair enough. It's basically comparing the meaning, right? So if you have two sentences and they mean the same thing but are worded differently, that's bidirectional entailment.
Gotcha. So they're making sure the misinformation is sneaky, hard to spot.
Yeah, very subtle.
Okay, makes sense. Makes you realize how sophisticated this stuff is getting. Kind of scary.
It is. And that's why, this whole understanding of how these hallucinations work is so important. But are you ready for the results? Ready to see how the LLMs did against these tricky questions?
Hit me with it. What did they find out? How good are these AI lie detectors?
Well, first of all, size isn't everything. You'd think a bigger LLM would be better at everything, right?
You'd think so, yeah.
But nope. Sometimes these smaller models did a better job.
Really? Got an example?
Yeah. There's this model QA2.5-3B.
Catchy name.
It's actually relatively small, but it outperformed those big, massive models in certain scenarios.
Okay, that is surprising. Any idea why that is?
Honestly, that's the million-dollar question. It means there's more to this whole hallucination detection thing than just, raw power. It could be those smaller models are picking up on, like, tiny language cues, or maybe it's the way they're trained, their education.
Yeah, it's not as simple as just build a bigger LLM and all our problems are solved. So what other interesting things did they find?
Well, this was interesting. General LLMs, those trained on a ton of different text, did a better job than LLMs specifically trained for medicine.
Really? That's kind of backwards, isn't it? I would have thought the ones focused on medicine would have an edge.
You'd think so, but think of it this way. General LLMs, they've seen it all. They have this broader understanding of language, of how information can be, twisted or manipulated.
Okay, so they're like the detectives who've worked every kind of case, seen every trick in the book.
Exactly. They spot patterns that a specialist might miss.
So even though they're not doctors, they're better at spotting the lies, at least when they don't have that extra medical knowledge.
Right. But here's the good news. When you give them that medical knowledge, all the LLMs, both the generalists and specialists, get way better at spotting those hallucinations.
So it's like giving those detectives a case file full of background info. The more they know, the better they can investigate.
You got it. Context is key. And here's one more thing that's super important, especially for using LLMs in medicine safely. When the researchers gave the LLMs the option to say, not sure, their accuracy went way up.
Oh, that makes sense. It's better to admit you don't know than to make something up that could be dangerous.
Exactly. It's like a doctor saying, I need to run more tests, or I need to consult with a specialist. It's responsible, it's cautious, even for an AI.
This is fascinating. So we've talked about how they made these hallucinations, how well the LLMs did at spotting them, but I'm dying to know, what did these medical hallucinations actually look like? Give me some examples.
All right, buckle up. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of medical misinformation.
Bring it on.
So one of the trickiest types was incomplete information. Like the LLM would give an answer that was partially right, but missing a crucial detail.
So almost true, but not the whole truth.
Exactly. Like if you ask how penicillin works, it might just say it kills bacteria.
Well, that's not wrong.
Not wrong, but it's missing the how, right? It leaves out that specific way that penicillin actually targets bacteria.
Okay, so it's sneaky. You think you got the info, but you're actually missing a key piece.
Right. Another sneaky one was mechanism and pathway misattribution. So basically, the LLM would link real biological processes together.
But in the wrong way.
Exactly. Making it seem like there's a cause and effect when there totally isn't.
Ooh, that sounds dangerous. Got an example?
Imagine a question about how aspirin reduces inflammation. The LLM might say it blocks calcium channels in immune cells, preventing histamine release, suppressing T-cell activation.
Okay, and?
Well, that's not how aspirin works at all.
Haha. Wow, so it's using real sciencey words but making up connections.
Exactly. Weaving truth and falsehood together to make a very believable lie.
It's kind of scary how easy it is to be misled.
It is, and that's why this research is so important. It's showing us what to watch out for.
Yeah, totally. Any other types of these crazy hallucinations?
Oh yeah, we got evidence fabrications. These LLMs would literally invent fake research studies or data.
So not just twisting the truth, but totally making stuff up. Wow.
Yeah, if you ask about, let's say, the success rate of a surgery, it might make up a study with an impossibly high success rate, complete with fake journal names, fake authors.
That's a whole new level of deception.
It is. But hey, remember, this deep dive, it's giving you the tools, the knowledge to be a more informed, a more, savvy consumer of information out there.
True, true. The more you know, the better. Well, I feel like we've just scratched the surface here. There's so much more to unpack. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, these medical hallucinations, the LLMs trying to spot them. But now I'm kind of curious about how the researchers, really dug into these hallucinations. Did they find any patterns, anything that helps us understand how they work?
Oh, absolutely. They did some fascinating analysis, and one of the most interesting things they looked at was semantics.
Semantics.
Yeah, the meaning of the words and how they, relate to each other. They use this technique called, it's a mouthful, bidirectional entailment.
Bidirectional entailment. You mentioned that earlier, but I'm still a little fuzzy on it. Can you break it down for me, make it make sense?
Sure. Imagine two sentences, right? One says the cat sat on the mat, and the other says the feline relaxed on a rug. Different words, but they basically mean the same thing.
Yeah, okay, I see that.
So that's bidirectional entailment, figuring out if two statements are logically the same, even if they're, worded differently.
Ah, gotcha. So they were basically checking how close the meaning of the made-up answers was to the real ones.
Precisely. And here's the kicker. They found that the hallucinations that were hardest for those LLMs to detect, the ones that really trick them, were actually the ones closest in meaning to the truth.
Wow, that's so sneaky. The better the lie, the harder it is to spot. It's like those really good art forgeries that are almost impossible to tell from the real deal.
That's a great analogy. It shows we can't just rely on simple fact checking or looking for keywords. We need AI that can understand the little nuances of language, the relationships between different ideas to really tell truth from fiction.
So we got to train these AIs to think more like human detectives, looking for subtle clues and inconsistencies.
Exactly. And that's a tough challenge, but this research gives us some really valuable clues, some guidance on how to make those hallucination detection methods even better.
It's like giving them a training manual. Like here's how to spot the fakes, the subtle manipulations.
Exactly. So we've talked about how they created these tricky questions, how well the LLMs did, but what about the specific categories? Did some areas of medicine have more of these hallucinations than others?
That's a great question. Did they look into that?
They did. They used what are called MIFH categories.
Ish.
It stands for medical subject headings. Think of it like the Dewey Decimal System for medical stuff, organizing info in libraries.
Ah, okay. So they use these categories to sort the questions and see if cardiology or neurology had more hallucinations than other areas.
Exactly. And it turns out disease-related information was really tricky for those LLMs.
Really, even though there's tons of medical literature out there about diseases.
You'd think so, right? More data, easier to spot the lies. But it seems like the complexity of diseases, the sheer volume of info, sometimes even conflicting info, it actually made it easier for the LLMs to blend fact and fiction.
So it's like they were taking advantage of the complexity to hide those lies better.
Exactly. But it wasn't all bad news. Queries about chemicals and drugs, those were easier to verify.
Okay, that makes sense. Like the chemical makeup of a drug or how it works. That's pretty clear cut, right? Less wiggle room for making things up.
You got it. But here's a curveball. The area with the lowest detection rate was psychiatry.
Psychiatry, that's surprising. Why do you think that was?
Well, the researchers thought it might be because there's less structured data in psychiatry compared to other areas. And mental health, it often involves very personal experiences, so it's harder to establish what's true for everyone.
Yeah, it's not like measuring blood pressure. It's more nuanced, harder to pin down.
Exactly. So it highlights this need for more research in this area, especially as we're seeing LLMs being used more and more in mental health.
Absolutely. So one big takeaway here is that these LLMs, they're not perfect, right? And they can be better at certain areas of medicine than others.
Right. We can't treat them all the same. We need specialized LLMs trained on the ins and outs of specific medical fields, just like we have doctors who specialize.
Makes sense. Like you wouldn't ask a heart surgeon to do brain surgery, right?
Exactly. But this research, it also has implications beyond just the tech side of things. It's a reminder that we all need to be more careful, more critical in how we evaluate information, especially medical information.
Especially with all the information overload we face every day, right? It's like we need to become our own lie detectors.
Love that. Cultivate that healthy skepticism, not just toward AI, but toward everything you read, everything you hear. Because the truth is out there, but it takes effort to find it.
This deep dive has been amazing, eye-opening for sure. We've learned so much about these medical LLMs, their weaknesses, the nature of misinformation itself. But there's one big question we haven't tackled yet.
And that is,
So, big question. Knowing what we know now, right, about MedHallu, about all the ways AI can, make up this medical stuff, how confident are you in spotting misinformation? Honestly, I'm feeling a little less sure of myself after all this.
that's a really good point. And I think it's a question we should all be asking ourselves. It's all about awareness, right?
Awareness of the problem, yeah, but also awareness of our own limits. Like we're not all experts. We can be fooled.
Exactly. We can't just assume we're immune to this stuff. Even experts can be tricked, especially with this really sophisticated misinformation. It's about staying curious, always asking questions, and not being afraid to say, I don't know, or I need to look into this more.
That's so important, especially these days when we're browning in information from everywhere, right? It's like we need to train ourselves to be human lie detectors.
I love that. Building our own internal hallucination detection system. But yeah, it's about cultivating that healthy skepticism, not just about what AI tells us, but about everything we encounter. Critical thinking is more important now than ever. It's recognizing that learning, figuring things out, it's a journey. It's not like you reach the end and you're done.
This deep dive has definitely been a wild ride, eye-opening for sure. We've learned so much about these medical LLMs, all their quirks, how misinformation works. But I think this is where we turn it over to our listeners, right?
Absolutely. Now that you've been with us on this journey, here's a little challenge, a call to action.
When you're reading stuff online, when you're listening to, news or podcasts, pay attention. Really pay attention to how you're evaluating that information. Look for those little signs, those subtle hints that something might be off, even if it sounds, totally convincing at first.
And don't just go with your gut. Question your assumptions. Even if something seems like it makes sense or it fits with what you already believe, take a step back. Consider other points of view, different perspectives.
And don't be afraid to go deeper, right? Look for multiple sources, double check the facts, talk to actual human experts if you need to, because in the end it's about using this knowledge wisely, responsibly to make the best decisions for yourself, for your health.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's all about empowering ourselves with knowledge.
Absolutely. Well, until our next deep dive, stay curious, stay skeptical, and stay well informed, everyone.